They gave me two choices that night: apologize to a man who had mocked me in front of 40 people, or get out of his house. I chose neither, and the moment I walked out that front door, I knew I was never coming back. My name is Gerald Marsh. I'm 53 years old. I spent 22 years building a career in commercial real estate, site acquisitions, zoning negotiations, the kind of work that isn't glamorous but pays well if you're good at it. And I was good at it. I've never been the loudest man in any room. Never needed to be. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, in a house where my father worked double shifts at a parts plant and my mother stretched every dollar until it bled. I learned early that dignity isn't something other people hand you. You build it quietly, with your hands, over time. Nobody gives you anything. I met my wife, Margaret, at a conference in Columbus 25 years ago. She was sharp, funny, and had this way of looking at a problem from 3 angles before anyone else had found the first one. I fell in love with her on a Tuesday afternoon over bad conference coffee and haven't regretted a single day of it. Not with her, anyway. What I didn't fully understand when I married Margaret was that I wasn't just marrying her. I was marrying into a family that had very specific ideas about who belonged and who didn't. Margaret's family is from Charleston, South Carolina. Her father, Edwin, retired from a career in insurance and spent the last decade of his working life convincing people he was more important than he was. Her mother, Vivienne, is the kind of woman who keeps a mental ledger of every social slight she's ever received and charges interest. Margaret has 2 siblings. Her older brother, Philip, who runs a landscaping company that I think he describes as a property management firm, at dinner parties, and her younger sister, Adele, who has been in and out of a graduate program in art history for about 6 years now. I'm not saying any of this to be cruel. I'm saying it because context matters, and for 22 years, I tried very hard to give every single one of them the benefit of the doubt. The disrespect was never loud. That's the thing people don't understand about this kind of family dynamic. It wasn't screaming. It wasn't obvious cruelty. It was quieter than that. It was Vivienne asking, at our first Thanksgiving together, whether I'd ever considered going back to school, with that pause before back, as if she already knew the answer. It was Edwin, talking about his golf club for 40 minutes straight, and then looking genuinely surprised when I mentioned I'd been a member of one for 11 years. It was Philip making a comment at Christmas dinner, the second year Margaret and I were married, about how some people are book smart and some people are street smart, while looking directly at me. I let it go. I always let it go. Because Margaret was there, and I loved her, and I told myself this was just how some families operated, old money manners and all that. I told myself they'd come around. They didn't. The summer after our 15th wedding anniversary, we attended what Edwin called the Coleman family gathering, which was, in practice, a 4-day weekend. At his property on Lake Murray in South Carolina. Edwin had bought this place about 12 years prior, a renovated lakefront house with a dock and a boathouse, and he never let anyone forget it. Every summer, the whole extended family descended on it for the long 4th of July weekend. I had been there 7 times at that point, 7 times driving 12 hours from Cincinnati, where we'd settled, with Margaret and our daughter Lily. 7 times sleeping in the guest room with the squeaky ceiling fan. 7 times hearing Edwin hold court at the head of the table and waiting for the one moment each trip where someone would say something to remind me. I was a guest in this family, not a member of it. That summer, Philip arrived with a new attitude. He'd just closed some deal on a commercial property. Ironic, given my line of work, and he was feeling good about himself. On the second evening, we were all out on the back deck after dinner. About 20 of us, including various cousins and neighbors Edwin had invited. Someone asked Philip about his business, and he launched into it. Then he looked over at me. "Gerald, you're in real estate, too, right?" he said. I nodded. "Commercial acquisitions, yeah. Huh." He smiled. The kind of smile that's designed to land somewhere between friendly and condescending. "So like, buying and selling properties for other people. Something like that," I said. "More on the development side. So you're kind of like a middleman." And that was it. That simple little word, delivered with that smile in front of family, neighbors, people I barely knew. Middleman. I felt Margaret tense slightly beside me. I looked at her. She was looking at her wine glass. I didn't say anything. I let it pass. Philip moved on to a story about a golf tournament he'd played in, and the moment dissolved into the evening air like it had never happened. But I remembered it. I always remembered. The following January, we were in Charleston for the holidays. Edwin had a dinner at his house. Formal table, good silver, the whole production. Over dessert, the conversation turned to the economy, and Edwin made a comment about how people in finance were ruining the country. Then he looked at me. No offense to you, Gerald. I'm in real estate, I said quietly. Right, he waved his hand. You know what I mean. I didn't, but I smiled and nodded because Margaret was 2 seats down, and her mother was watching the whole thing with those flat, evaluating eyes, and I had learned by then that any pushback I offered would become a story told at my expense later. Margaret talked to them after that dinner. I know because she told me she had. She said it went fine, that they understood, that it wouldn't happen again. It happened again every single time. By year 18 of our marriage, I had stopped expecting anything different. I showed up at these gatherings with a kind of low-grade armor on. I was polite. I helped Edwin with the grill, without being asked. I sat through Vivienne's monologues about the neighborhood homeowners association. I played cornhole with Philip and lost on purpose, because winning seemed to cost more than losing. I had become very good at shrinking myself, just enough to avoid the moments that hurt. But something shifts in you after enough years of that. It doesn't happen all at once. It's slow. It's like sediment building up at the bottom of a river, invisible for years, and then one day the river changes course, and you understand that the buildup was never neutral. It was always leading somewhere. The 4th of July that I'm about to tell you about, I was 52 years old. Lily was 19, and had stayed home in Cincinnati to work a summer internship. It was just Margaret and me making the drive down I-75 and then cutting east through Tennessee. 12 hours. Margaret slept for the first half, and then talked quietly about her sister's situation. Adele had recently gotten out of a difficult relationship and was staying with Edwin and Vivienne temporarily. I listened. I've always been a good listener. We arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The house was already full. Philip was there with his wife, Connie, and their 2 teenagers. Adele was there, quieter than usual. 3 of Edwin's brothers were there with their families. A few neighbors I'd seen before. It was the biggest gathering I'd attended, closer to 40 people across the long weekend. The first day was fine. I helped set up the dock, carried chairs, fixed a broken latch on the boathouse door that had apparently been stuck for 2 seasons. Nobody thanked me for the latch, but that was par for the course. I cooked the appetizers on Friday evening because I'm actually a good cook and I wanted something to do with my hands. On Saturday afternoon, things changed. We were sitting on the deck, maybe 15 of us, and Edwin had been holding court for a while about a lawsuit some neighbor of his was involved in. I wasn't paying close attention. I was watching a boat on the lake and thinking about nothing in particular when Philip said, from across the table, "Gerald, didn't you have some deal fall through this year?" I looked over at him. "What? Some big acquisition. Margaret mentioned it." He leaned back in his chair. "What happened with that?" I felt the familiar tightening. The way a question like that lands when you know it's not really a question. "It didn't fall through," I said. "We restructured the timeline. It's still in progress." "Ah," he nodded slowly. "So it's on hold. It's in progress." "Right." He glanced at Edwin. "Because I was thinking, you know, if you ever wanted to get into something more stable, I could use someone with sales experience. We're expanding the residential side." The deck went very quiet. Not completely. There were still conversations at the other end of the table, but the cluster of people around us got quiet enough that I knew everyone heard it. Philip was offering me a job, cutting grass, in front of his father, his wife, Margaret's cousins, neighbors I didn't know. He was sitting there in a polo shirt that probably cost $80 and offering me, a man who had spent 2 decades in commercial real estate, a job working for his landscaping company. I looked at Margaret. She was looking at the table. I looked at Edwin. He was nodding, slowly, like Philip had said something reasonable. "I appreciate it," I said, and I stood up to refill my drink. I went inside. I stood at the kitchen sink for probably 3 full minutes, looking out the window at the lake, and I made a decision. Not the decision I ended up making, that came later. But I decided, standing there, that I was done swallowing these moments. I just didn't know yet exactly what done looked like. When I went back out, the conversation had moved on. Margaret caught my eye and gave me a look that said later, which meant she'd seen it, which meant she'd have something to say about it, which meant that, once again, we'd have a quiet conversation later that night where she'd acknowledge it was inappropriate, and then suggest I try to see it from Philip's perspective, and then ask me to be patient a little longer. We'd had some version of that conversation, probably 30 times in 22 years. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, Edwin knocked on the guest room door. I opened it. He was still dressed, holding a glass of bourbon. "Gerald," he said, "I want you to know Philip didn't mean anything by that earlier." "I know," I said. "He has a lot of respect for you." I looked at him for a moment. "Edwin, I've been part of this family for 22 years. I've been here every summer. I've never once caused a problem. I've listened to a lot of things that weren't easy to listen to, and I've kept my mouth shut because I love your daughter and I respect your home." I paused. But what happened today wasn't nothing. Edwin looked at me the way a man looks at something that has suddenly become inconvenient. "I understand you're sensitive about." "Good night, Edwin," I said, and I closed the door. I lay in bed next to Margaret that night and I thought about the river, the sediment, 22 years of small moments stacked one on top of another. Philip's smile across that deck. Vivian's question about going back to school. Edwin's hand wave dismissing my entire career. Margaret's eyes on her wine glass when the moment came and she could have said something and didn't. Sunday started quietly. I made coffee for everyone. I was civil. I sat through breakfast and didn't bring up the night before. It was mid-afternoon when Vivienne found me alone on the dock. I was fishing, or pretending to fish. Mostly just sitting with a line in the water and some space between me and the noise of the house. Vivienne came down the steps with her posture perfect and her sunglasses on, and she sat in the chair beside me like she'd been invited. "Gerald," she said, "I want to address what happened yesterday." "Okay," I said. "Philip was trying to be helpful. You made it uncomfortable for everyone by reacting the way you did." I looked at her. "I stood up and got a drink. You made it clear you were upset. That affected the energy of the whole afternoon." She folded her hands. "Edwin spoke to you last night, and you were very cold with him. He was trying to extend an olive branch. He told me I was being sensitive." "Well," she paused. "You were." I set down my rod. "Gerald, this family has welcomed you with open arms." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because after 22 years she genuinely believed that. "What would you like from me, Vivienne?" I asked. She straightened up. "I'd like you to go and apologize to Philip. He hasn't said anything, but I can tell you upset him. And I'd like you to make things right with Edwin. For Margaret's sake, if nothing else." I looked at the water. "If you're not willing to do that," she said, and her voice dropped just slightly, the way it does when someone is delivering something they've thought about, "then I think it might be best if you and Margaret head back home early. This is a family gathering, and when one person is carrying negativity—" "I'll think about it," I said. She patted my arm and walked back up to the house. I sat on that dock for another hour. Here's what I thought about. I thought about Philip's face when he offered me that job. I thought about 22 years of Christmas dinners and summer weekends and long drives and swallowed words. I thought about the conversation Margaret and I would have tonight, and the one after that, and the 10 more after that, over the next 10 years. I thought about Edwin's dismissive hand wave. I thought about how I had fixed the latch on the boathouse that morning, and nobody had said thank you. And I thought about what Vivienne had just said. Apologize to Philip. I had not done anything wrong. I had stood up and gotten a drink, and she was asking me to apologize for it, in front of family, as a condition of being allowed to stay. I was 68 miles from the nearest airport. I went inside. I found Margaret in the living room with Adele. I said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And we stepped into the hallway. I told her what Vivienne had said. Margaret listened. Then she said, "Babe, I know it wasn't fair, but can you just, for the weekend, just smooth it over? We're here until Tuesday." I looked at her for a long moment. "I love you," I said, I love you too, she said. I need you to hear me, I said. Not just this time, all of it. 22 years of it. She went quiet. I have never asked them for anything, I said. I have shown up here every single summer. I have sat through every dinner. I have bitten my tongue so many times that I've lost count. And your mother just told me to apologize to Philip for standing up and getting a drink. My voice was even. I wasn't angry, or at least I wasn't showing it. I was just very, very clear. I need to know if you think I should do that. Margaret was quiet for a while. Then she said, I think we should just get through the weekend. That was my answer. I went to the guest room. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I opened my phone, and I looked up flights from Columbia Metropolitan Airport to Cincinnati. There was one leaving at 6:40 the following morning, one connection through Charlotte. Total travel time, 4 hours and 50 minutes. It cost $340. I bought it. Then I sat there for a moment and thought about whether I was being rash. Thought about whether 22 years of goodwill could be undone by one weekend. Thought about whether I owed it to Margaret to try one more time. And then I thought about what it would feel like to sit across from Philip at dinner tonight and apologize to him for having feelings. What my face would look like doing it. What he would look like receiving it. I started packing my bag. I was quiet about it. Margaret was still with Adele. I could hear people on the deck outside. I folded my clothes the way I always fold clothes, methodically, no wasted motion. I took my toiletries from the bathroom. I plugged my phone in to charge and I sat in the chair by the window and I read for about 2 hours while the sun went down. I heard Margaret come down the hallway around 7. She opened the door. She saw the bag. Gerald, I have a flight at 6:40, I said. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. You're serious? Yes. Because of this? Because of one weekend? I looked at her. It wasn't one weekend. She came in and sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the floor. She said things I won't repeat here. Some of them sharp, some of them quiet, some of them the kind of thing that comes out when someone is scared and doesn't know what to do with that feeling. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I said, I love you. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because I can't keep doing what I've been doing, and tonight made that completely clear to me. She left the room. I heard her downstairs for a while. I heard other voices, Edwin's, and once Vivian's sharp tone, though I couldn't make out the words. Nobody came to talk to me. I set an alarm for 4:45 and I went to sleep. In the morning, I dressed and carried my bag downstairs before 5 o'clock. The house was dark and quiet. I wrote a note, just 3 sentences, left on the kitchen counter, and I called a cab from the app on my phone. I stood on the front porch and waited. The sky was just starting to go gray at the edges. The lake was absolutely still. I could smell coffee from somewhere, maybe the neighbor's house. And I stood there in the quiet, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Peace. Not happiness. Not triumph. Just the particular quiet that comes when you finally stopped fighting something that was never worth fighting and let it go. The cab came at 5:12. I put my bag in the trunk, and I got in and I didn't look back at the house. I made my flight. I had a window seat, and as the plane climbed out of Columbia and banked north, I watched the city get small below me and I thought about what comes next. Not with anger. More like a man taking inventory after a long time of not looking too closely at the shelves. I landed in Cincinnati just after noon. I drove home from the airport. I unlocked the front door and walked into a house that smelled like my house. Coffee and wood, and something Margaret would probably call old books. And I set my bag down in the hallway, and I called my friend Dennis, who had heard enough over the years to understand without needing a lot of background. I left, I said. Good, he said. We talked for an hour. The messages started coming in that afternoon. First from Margaret. One long one, then shorter ones as the day went on, the tone shifting from hurt to something closer to anger, to something that sounded, by evening, like the first tentative reaching toward actual conversation. I didn't respond to most of them that day. Not to punish her. Just because I needed to think clearly, and I'd learned over the years that I think better when I'm not reacting. From Vivienne, I got exactly one message. It said, Gerald, I hope you understand the position you've put this family in. What you did was selfish and hurtful, and I think you owe everyone here an explanation. I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and made myself dinner. From Philip, I got nothing. Not that day. Not for 2 weeks. When he did finally reach out, it was a text that said, "I heard things got heated. No hard feelings from my end." I stared at that for a long time. That was his version of it. Things got heated, as if the whole weekend had been some mutual disagreement that we'd both contributed to equally. I didn't respond. From Edwin, I got a voicemail 3 days after I left. He said, in his measured way, that he thought I had behaved badly and created an unnecessary scene. He said he hoped I would come to my senses and reach out to Margaret. He said he was not a man who holds grudges. He said all of this with the complete confidence of someone who has never once considered that he might be the problem. I didn't call him back. Margaret and I talked, really talked, about a week after I got home. She drove back from Charleston on Monday, and we spent the first couple of days in the same house, being carefully polite with each other, the way people are when something has broken, and neither of them is sure yet how badly. Then one evening she came and found me in the study, and she sat down across from me, and she said, "Tell me what you need me to hear." And I told her. Not the hot version. Not the version where I'm cataloging grievances and scoring points. The quiet version. The one where I told her about the sediment, about what it had felt like, year after year, to sit at those tables and absorb those small cuts and watch her look at her wine glass. About the specific moment on that dock when I understood that nothing was going to change unless I changed it. About how tired I was, not of her, of the performance, of being the person who was always patient, always measured, always the one who kept it together for the sake of the weekend. She listened. She cried a little, which she almost never does. She said, "I knew. I always knew. I didn't know how to." And then she stopped. And that stop said more than anything she could have finished that sentence with. We didn't fix everything that night. I don't think things like this get fixed in a night. But something shifted. The pretending stopped, at least between the two of us. We started having conversations we should have had 15 years ago. Over the next several months, Margaret had some hard conversations with her family. I wasn't in the room for most of them. She told me about afterward, in the spare, factual way she has when something has cost her something to do. Edwin said I had overreacted. Vivian said Margaret needed to manage me better. Philip said he hadn't meant anything by it and couldn't understand why everyone was making it into a big deal. None of them said they were sorry. Not directly. Not in a way that cost them anything. The following summer, Margaret and I did not go to Lake Murray. We went to Asheville instead. Just the two of us, rented a small house in the mountains for a week. We hiked. We ate at a different restaurant every night. We stayed up late talking about everything. Our daughter Lily, who was doing well in school. Margaret's work. Things I wanted to do before I retired. Plans that didn't require anyone's approval. On the last night, sitting on the back porch of that little house, with the mountains dark against the sky, Margaret said, "I should have said something, that day on the deck. I should have said something to Philip." "Yes," I said. "I'm sorry I didn't." That meant more to me than every voicemail Edwin hadn't left, and every apology Philip hadn't managed to put into words. Because it cost her something to say it. She knew it had been a long time coming, and she said it anyway. I'm not going to tell you that everything is perfect now. Marriage is long and complicated, and the truth is that some things change slowly. But here is what I know. I am not the same man who sat at those tables and swallowed his dignity for the sake of a weekend. I know what I'm worth. I know what I will and won't absorb. That knowledge didn't come from the argument I didn't have or the apology I didn't give. It came from the cab ride at 5 in the morning and the window seat and landing in Cincinnati and walking into my own house and calling my friend and saying 2 words. I left. Edwin still holds the gathering every 4th of July. We haven't been back. I don't know if we ever will be, and honestly, I've stopped spending energy on the question. What I know is that the lake will be there regardless of who's sitting on the dock, and some things are beautiful whether you're present for them or not. A man once told me, my father, actually, back in Dayton, when I was probably 17 and furious about something I've since forgotten, he said, "Gerald, you can't control what people think of you. You can only control whether you let it cost you anything." It took me 35 years to understand what he meant. I understand it now.